Tree branches block the sunlight. Horses pound their hooves on the ground. A man, holding a chest in his hands, runs through the forest. People are chasing him on horses, with glowing red eyes. The man clutches the chest to himself and silently insults his pursuers. A hooded man exhales steam from his mouth. The brunette gets an angry look on his face, wondering how they found him. He puts his foot in front of him, stopping. It is located at the end of the cliff in front of the shore. The brunette has a look of excitement and doubt on his face. He turns back angrily. The horse throws its head up and snorts. The four horsemen move closer to the man. The brunette frowns and puts his hand in front of him with a weapon. He takes a fighting stance, pointing his staff at his pursuers. One of the riders stops. The brunette's hand with the chest trembles. The man clenches his teeth and thinks that since they are here, it means the rest of the Shilkrano have already been found. He swings his staff, fending off the attacks of the horsemen. He holds the yellow chest near his chest and thinks that Alia will be finished if they get to it. The brunette waves his staff upward. He hits the ground with his weapon. Small cracks appeared on the ground from the impact site. The brunette frowns and wrinkles appear on the bridge of his nose. He realizes that he has no other options. He opens the chest and light comes out of it. On a red pillow lies an unusually shaped artifact. One of the riders is surprised and raises his hand. A bright light illuminates people in dark clothes. The brunette brings his hand to the artifact. He narrows his eyes and screams. One of the horsemen swings his sword at the man, who tears off part of his clothing. The brunette presses the artifact to his chest with his wounded hand. The rider makes his attack. The artifact is attached to the man's chest. It begins to glow blue. The brunette's eyes light up with a bright light. A vortex of energy appears on the cliff. It rushes into the sky, breaking through tree branches. The whirlwind subsides and leaves a bright light. Rays of light diverge in different directions. The flash of light becomes brighter. A bright glow illuminates the entire cliff. 24 years later, a small wooden house stands in the middle of the forest. A red-haired guy and a blonde woman stand with swords. The guy takes a fighting stance and exhales. He swings his wooden sword several times, attacking the blonde. He gathers magic in his left hand. The guy tenses up and streams of energy come from his hand. He rushes towards the woman. She raises her eyebrow, surprised. A guy attacks a woman with his magic ball. She waves her hand, throwing away the magical attack. The guy raises his hand with a wooden sword back. He swings, picking up leaves from the floor and screams. Confusion appears on his face and a dark silhouette appears from behind. He turns around sharply, asking when he had time. The red-haired guy gets hit in the head. He falls with tears in his eyes and screams. The male elf folds his arms across his chest and says that Durand is going too fast, asking if he should stop attacking so obviously, to which the red-haired guy screams that it's just Iris being too strong. The blonde raises her hands and heals the guy with magic, while the man asks that the guy really thinks it's easy to fight the summoner, and he screams that he's like that too. The elf opens his book and says that he never said it was easy. The woman is surrounded by a light-colored mist as the man tells him to go back. The elf closes his book. Durand rubs his forehead with his hand as the man says that cursing that an opponent is strong is tantamount to admitting weakness. He blushes and winces when the elf asks why he avoids becoming a summoner. Durand runs his hands over the grass, saying that he can't do it. A woman with red hair holds an open book in front of her, and the guy says that, unlike his mother, he does not have the talent to become a summoner. The elf looks at Durand with his blue eyes and says that Leia also constantly failed, but even despite this, she did not give up, and therefore it is important not to do everything right. But what in case of failure? The red-haired guy gets to his feet and screams for him to stop talking about this, about his mother, whom he doesn't even remember, and this constant moralizing. Durand looks away and puffs out his cheeks, asking why he is constantly trying to force him to do something like his mother, saying that they are not the same person, and clicks his tongue. A massive hand rests on his head, and someone says that he is certainly not Leia. The man with the beard grins and says that Durand is just Durand, and the guy screams that it's Uncle Horner. The man holds the guy by the hand and laughs, telling Elkael not to go too far, because the guy is still a child, to which the elf says that a man shouldn't always take his side. Durand hugs Horner and smiles. He says that no one understands him except him, and this elf is only young on the outside. But in fact he is a 100-year-old grandfather, and of course that's why he won't understand him. The guy looks up at the man, who asks if they're going to have fun, to which the protagonist replies that he won't train with him, because he doesn't even regulate his strength. Horner poses, showing off his muscles, and says that to be popular with women, you need to have muscles like his. His chest was pierced by the words of Durand, who asks why his uncle had not yet married. Horner's face shows awkwardness and excitement. He throws the guy up and screams that he is stupid. Durand lands on the man's shoulder. Horner holds the protagonist on his shoulder and tells the elf to go and rest, because he himself will sit in the guy, to which the elf wanted to object. The man grins and looks at Durand, saying that Elkail's rushing does nothing, and the protagonist himself must be prepared for this. A smile appears on the elf's face, and he thanks Horner. He folds his arms over his chest and sighs when the man asks if Durand wants to warm up. The sun illuminates a wooden house with a vegetable garden. A light shines from the window, illuminating the darkness of the night. The heroes are sitting at the table and having dinner when the elf asks if Horner will really go to Stioden tomorrow, to which the man replies that it seems he will have to, because as far as he has heard, the pressure from the revolutionary troops is becoming more serious every day. The man with the beard smiles and brings the spoon of food to his mouth, saying that he didn't think of staying long. A hand rests on Horner's shoulder, and the silhouette says that they all owe him a huge debt. The man with the beard turns back to the silhouette, saying that he has arrived after all. The brunette with stubble smiles, and they call him Thomas. The stars shine in the dark night sky. Durand turns his head to the man with the beard and asks if he can stay a few more days. Horner smiles and closes his eyes, apologizing for making the guy sad. He pats the elf on the shoulder, causing him to flinch, and says that Durand is very lucky, because Elkail is a great magician, and such teachers are rare to find. The protagonist shudders and raises his eyebrows. Horner looks at him and sighs. He holds out a decorated boomerang in his hand and tells the guy to take it, because it's a parting gift. Durand raises the boomerang above himself, asking that he is not a child and why does he need toys. Horner smiles broadly at the protagonist and says that it looks like an ordinary boomerang, but it is magical, made to a special order, and for a guy with his wind skills, it could be a good weapon. The guy smiles broadly and has an idea. He gets up from his chair at the table and runs somewhere. The elf is worried and extends his hand, asking where he ran off in the middle of the meal, to which Horner, laughing, says that the guy is so like his mother in that he does as he pleases, and so that Elkail does not rush Durand. A man with a beard holds his head and says that in order to climb a high rock, it is important to move slowly at the beginning. The elf turns to Horner and, smiling, says that perhaps he will be the best teacher for him. The men turn to Thomas, and the man with the beard says that Durand is scared. Perhaps he wants to run away from the realization that he may not be a summoner at all. A smile appears on the brunette's face, and he says that he is sincerely grateful to them for becoming mentors for the guy. The men smile, looking at Thomas, and Horner says that they are friends and there is no need to thank them. Durand stands in front of the house and raises a boomerang. A bird flies across the night sky. The guy takes a stance and swings a boomerang. His green eyes are shining, and he thinks he needs to act now. A magical beam of energy extends from the bird. Durand throws the boomerang with a flourish and exhales. The boomerang turns in the air, colliding with a bird. He returns to the hands of the protagonist, and the bird falls to the ground. Horner gives a thumbs up and screams that of course he guessed, but it turned out that the guy really clearly sees the wind directions, and the protagonist says that it was easy. The man laughs and the elf leans on the wall of the house. Elkail smiles and lowers one eyebrow, thinking that to climb a high rock, you need to go slowly at the beginning. He closes his eyes and sighs, thinking that the mood to speak wise words has completely gone. Thomas looks out the window and sighs. Beams of energy appear before his eyes. He falls to his knee and the elf enters the house worried. Elkail helps Thomas sit and asks what happened to him. The brunette looks at the glowing veins on his body and thinks that this is already the limit. He closes his eyes and sweat runs down his forehead, and he thinks that he wanted the calm to last as long as possible. A two-story house is burning with a bright flame and people are screaming to be saved and that there is a demon there. A dark silhouette looks at the hand, surrounded by flames. A heavily armored footsteps on the board. Steam comes out from under the figure's mask. He is holding a strange artifact. The artifact rotates, indicating the direction. It lights up with a bright flash. The light from it illuminates the man's mask. A clear blue sky is over the village house, and someone says, "Good luck, Horner," to which the man apologizes for leaving them on the day of Laius's wake. And Durand sadly asks when his uncle will return, to which he replies that he doesn't even know, but probably when the war ends. The man with a beard smiles and holds his hand on his belt, telling the guy not to worry, because he is a general of the Revolutionary Storden army. Thomas pats Durand on the head and asks that Horner will be calmer if he shows him off well. The man puts his hand on the guy's head. He smiles and points his thumb at himself, saying that he promises to return, and he is a general after all. Durand punches the man in the stomach as he looks at the elf and tells him to take care of the protagonist, since he will definitely become an outstanding summoner. Elkale nods his head with a smile. Horner walks down the path and waves as Durand raises his hands and screams to make sure he comes back. A black and white portrait of Laius sits on a shelf. Daylight illuminates the room through the windows, and someone says that after the huge man left, they now have so much free space at home. The protagonist shudders and looks in surprise at Thomas, who asks the elf and the guy if they want to go to the market, to which Elkale responds positively. Durand makes a displeased expression on his face and asks if the elf can't go alone, saying that he is so meticulous that he can choose one apple for hours, and he doesn't know how to bargain at all. The guy lies with his tongue hanging out and a bump on his head. He lies on the brown horse as Thomas asks if it was worth it, to which Elkale says he would have continued whining nonstop. The brunette hits himself on the chest and smiles when the elf asks if everything is okay with him, and he replies that he's really talking about yesterday. Then he doesn't have to worry, because everything is fine. Thomas waves to the departing heroes. He places his hand on the doorknob. Entering the house, the man falls to his knees and coughs. On the evening street there are shops, illuminated by light from the windows, and the elf asks that since they bought everything they need, then they should probably return slowly. Durand makes a dissatisfied face with a bag in his hands and says that he knew that going to the market with Elkale is too tiring, because how can you choose fruit for an hour? The elf with a bag in his hands turns away and sighs, telling the guy to be grateful that such apples can be obtained at all during the war, to which he gets angry and shouts that there are not so many differences between apples, and he constantly drags in the war. Durand turns his head towards the man sitting on the ground. He flinches and opens his mouth, wondering if this is what he's thinking about. Several scrolls lie on top of each other, and the guy wonders if these are really summoning scrolls. A man in a dark hood sits in front of the scrolls. He smiles widely, showing a toothless mouth. The elf's hand covering the bag trembles when the protagonist addresses him. Elkale turns his head towards the guy who asks if he can go first, saying that, as he said, he will gratefully take a short walk around the bazaar. The corners of the elf's mouth rise, and he says that he should not come too late and not forget that today is his mother's wake. Elkale leaves and Durand waves to him, shouting not to worry and that he will come soon. The mustachioed man pays attention to the guy. The protagonist points to the scrolls and asks with a smile how much they cost. The man grins and raises an eyebrow, asking that he even understands what he wants to buy, because he will have to give up all his property for them. The guy's face darkens and he gets angry, thinking that he has to give everything, and the man tells him not to interfere and leave. Durand places his hand on his waist and addresses the man. He runs his hand through his hair and says with a satisfied smile that, in fact, he is not an ordinary person, and his mother was a very famous summoner. The man's eyes glow yellow when the guy says that he is also being trained by a great summoner from the Heavenly Council. Durand holds the scroll in his hand and shouts, "Great." He jumps and raises his hand, smiles and screams that he too can become a summoner, asking if then Elkale will stop grumbling. Delight can be seen on his face, and he unrolls the scroll. He is holding a piece of parchment with nothing on it. Durand is puzzled and examines the scroll, asking if it is a fake. He turns around with a dissatisfied expression on his face. The man who was sitting on the floor has disappeared, and the guy screams that he is a fraudster. The protagonist raises his hand with a scroll and shouts that he should just try to catch his eye. The sun sets behind the mountains and the sky turns pink and purple. The elf takes off his hood and tells Thomas that Durand will come a little later. A man lies trembling on the floor and Elkale screams, "Thomas." The elf takes him in his arms and says that he definitely has some problems. The brunette is breathing heavily and sweat is rolling down his face. He says that it looks like it's time to tell the truth. Elkale looks at the man with a sad look and asks what truth. Thomas says that 24 years ago, a dangerous historical relic kept in the Heavenly Council, the Shilkrano, went missing. He sits in front of a burning fire, saying that he is a protector. A girl with red eyes sits, turning towards a man who says that she is a summoner Laya, a member of the Heavenly Council. A girl with white hair stands with her head down and her arms crossed over her chest. Thomas says that she is Elhale's older sister, Captain Eve. The fire illuminates the wide chest, and the man says that they barely took the Shilkrano from them, but could not return it back to the Heavenly Council. Thomas opens a chest in which 3 artifacts are found. They shine blue, and the man says that no one should have been trusted, and this relic should not have been given away. The golden artifacts shine brightly, and Thomas says that for these reasons they decided to take one piece at a time and keep it for themselves. The man, Leia and Eve have their backs to each other, and he says that they hid them even in secret from each other. Riders on horses rush through the forest, and Thomas says that not much time passed before she fell into pieces into the hands of the enemy. The brunette runs, clutching the chest, and says that because the relic wanted to be reunited, the location of the remaining parts also became known. Thomas unbuttons his clothes and says that he needed a more secret place to hide the relic. The elf looks at the man's chest in shock. He has an artifact on his chest that emits crystals, and Thomas says that he decided to hide it inside himself. Elkale bites his lip and looks worried, crying out that how could a man act so recklessly. Thomas breathes heavily, lying on the elf's lap, and says that he needed to hide the enormous power of the Shilkrano. The artifact on the man's chest left his skin covered with crystals, and he says that thanks to the power he received, he was able to confuse his enemies with magic. But as you can see, everything is bad. Elkale frowns and says that this means that the man did not injure his left hand in the war, and that means Leia's death also happened because of this. Thomas's veins bulge, and he says his body can no longer handle the force. He is breathing heavily and sweat is running down his face. He says that if something happens to him, but does not finish. Clouds fly across the dark evening sky, and the protagonist screams, asking where the crook has gone. Durand looks around and angrily shouts that he gave all his money for this. He flinches when something explodes behind him. He turns around, and the light illuminates his back, and he says that their house is on that side. Durand raises his head and with concern on his face says that his father and Elkale are there. Fire particles fly through the air. Wooden houses burn with bright flames. Thomas covers his chest and sits on his knee, saying that why exactly this happened today. Apparently uninvited guests came. He puts his hand on his staff and says that they need to get out of here. The elf waves his hands and cries out with concern on his face, asking what Thomas is talking about, because they can't leave him alone. The brunette touches the door with a bandaged hand and asks if Elkale remembers the promise he made to him then. He opens the door, behind which there is a flame, and tells the elf to fulfill his promise today. Elhale furrows his eyebrows and tells Thomas to wait. The brunette turns and smiles, telling him to take care of Durand. Several dark figures stand in front of Thomas. One of them points to the man and tells them to catch him. The brunette takes a fighting stance when enemies attack him. Thomas glares at them. He swings his staff, attacking 2 people. They fall to the ground. Thomas looks back at the elf and screams that he doesn't have time. He furrows his eyebrows and shouts for him to leave quickly. The elf gets worried and bites his lip when the man shouts that he must not let Durand come back here. Thomas looks back at the departing elf, who replies that he will take care of it. Horses walk across the burning ground. The brunette stands in a fighting stance and his eye glows. The fire illuminates his back and he angrily says that now it's time for him to meet their guests. Several dark silhouettes stand in front of Thomas. One of them clenches his hand into a fist and asks where the Shilkrano is. The brunette smiles and furrows his brows, saying that if he wants to hear the answer, he will have to defeat him first. The masked man's eyes light up red, and he says that he couldn't have come such a long way in vain. One of the pursuers accumulates magic in his hand while casting a spell. The ball in his hand burns with a bright flame, and he continues to cast the spell. The dark figure reaches out and shoots a fireball. Thomas dodges the magical attack. He turns around and is surprised. The enemy behind him rises to his feet. He rushes towards the man. Thomas and the figure in black exchange quick blows. The man uses his staff to block the attack. The ground under his feet is covered with cracks. Thomas swings his leg, striking his opponent. A figure in black flies up and hits the floor. A man in massive armor rises to his feet. His head is turned back unnaturally. He lowers his head and his eye glows red. The vegetable garden and wooden house are engulfed in flames. Thomas tenses, and particles of fire rush past him, and he thinks that he applied enough force, and they stand up so cheerfully. A figure in a white-fanged mask asks if he is really not capable of more. The man's left eye glows blue, and he asks if he really thinks so. Blue magic appears in the ground under enemies' feet. A large magical explosion occurs. The masked figure watches his comrades fall. The bandages unwind from Thomas's hand, and he asks if he really thought that he was waiting for them all the time and didn't even prepare. Steam comes out from under the figure's mask, and he asks for forgiveness for underestimating the man's strength. He is surprised by the balls rising from the ground. The left side of Thomas's body is covered in crystals, and he says that he will apologize in hell. A massive blue explosion occurs. The brunette lowers his hand and leans on the staff, wondering if this is all. A skeleton with a scythe crawls out of the rising dust towards him. Thomas's blue eye reflects the skeleton, and he is surprised. The undead strikes the man with his scythe, causing him to scream. Thomas slams his staff into the ground, stopping. The skeleton holds a scythe in his hands, and the man thinks that this is the Shadow Reaper, who tells him that no matter how hard the brunette tries, it will all be in vain. Thomas bites his lip and wonders if the masked figure was a summoner, although that wouldn't change anything. He clenches his crystal hand into a fist and says that he is a protector and protects both the people and the relic. He is a protector and protects what he has to protect, and he should stop talking. Thomas takes off, approaching the skeleton. The protagonist looks up and worries. The elf jumps off his horse and calls Durand. Elkael takes the guy by the shoulders, and the protagonist asks what kind of flash it was. Nothing happened, because it seems to be in the direction of their house. To which the man replies that he doesn't have time to explain to him, and they need to leave quickly. Durand looks at the elf with a worried face and asks why he is alone and where his father is. Elkael furrows his eyebrows and says that they will talk on the way, but first they need to find a safe place so that the guy can hide. Durand looks at the elf in bewilderment and asks if he really left his father there. He takes the man by the chest, screaming that how could he come, leaving his father. Elkael opens his mouth wide and screams for the guy to stop acting like a child. He furrows his brows and looks down at the protagonist, saying that Thomas is now fighting his enemies at the cost of his life, all in order to save his family. The elf's face shows surprise and bewilderment when Durand asks if he is not also part of their family. Tears roll down the guy's cheeks and says that then Elkael should also protect his father, asking if this is not so. Tears appear in the elf's eyes. He turns his head away, saying that Thomas started it first. Durand gets on his horse when Elkael turns around and asks what the guy is doing, to which the protagonist replies that if he wants, then let him go alone. His eyes turn red and he says that he will go save his father. Thomas breathes heavily and points with his staff as the masked man says he has commendable skills. A dark figure in a cloak and mask holds an open book and says that if he at least now gives up the Shilkrano and swears allegiance to it, then he will leave it to live out a miserable life. The man waves his staff and asks what kind of loyalty he is talking about, adding that he still underestimates him. Thomas's eyes light up blue, and he tells them to attack because they're still not done. Steam comes out of the figure's mask, and he says that he will, since he wants it, and Durand screams, calling for his father. The man turns around in shock at the scream, asking if it is his son and how he was able to return. The masked man's red eyes glow in the dark. Durand, with a frightened expression on his face, screams, "No!" The Dark Reaper strikes with his sweeping strike. Thomas falls, bleeding. The guy looks in shock at the blood splashes. Blue fire absorbs dark thorns. A dark masked figure stands with an open book. His image becomes cloudy and blurry. He tells the man to remember his last seconds. Durand screams, his mouth wide open in despair. The Reaper's attack cuts through the air. The elf stands behind the man. Thomas falls, struck by the attack. Elkael, with a shocked expression on his face, hears the guy scream, "Dad." Sweat runs down his fingers, and he wonders what he's done. A man in dark clothes stands with ashes flying next to him. He says that the brunette protected the silkscreen, saying goodbye to his life. Durand, with tears in his eyes, swings his boomerang and says that he will not forgive him for this. He lands several strikes on the summoner, who fights off his attacks. The guy puts his hand behind his back. He looks at the enemy with bright green eyes with malice. A stream of green energy passes through his head. Durand swings and throws his boomerang. The masked figure waves his hand. His eyes glow and he holds a boomerang, asking if this is Thomas' son. Several figures in black grab the guy from behind. They slam his face onto the floor. Durand looks at the blade they placed next to him. The masked figure looks at the guy with sparkling red eyes and asks where the Shilkrano is hidden. Beams of light energy pierce the silhouettes and the elf sits down next to the guy, saying, "Hail of blades." The masked man is surprised and perplexed. A blue fire burns behind Elhail and Iris stands in front. Steam comes out of the elf's clenched teeth, and his eyes burn with a blue flame, and he says that they would all better not even dream of getting out of there alive. With an angry look on his face, he waves his hand using magic hail. Figures in the dark are pierced by large shards of light, and the girl runs between them. Iris swings her shining sword. She hits the man with the mask. The Dark Reaper swings his scythe and deflects her blow. The girl lands, and the elf with a surprised look wonders if he really defended himself. The skeleton's eyes glow purple, and the masked figure asks if this is the maximum son of the great magician Elhail. The elf clenches his teeth and looks angrily at the enemy. Iris runs forward, swinging her sword as Elhail unleashes a hail of blades. The girl attacks the Reaper several times with quick movements. She jumps high above him. The masked figure puts his arms up to protect himself from the blow. The armor on his arm is cracking. Fragments of armor fly in different directions, and he says that it was not bad, but no more. Iris swings her sword, and the figure says that with his skills now, it is impossible to defeat him, who has received the protection of the king. The blow of her sword lands on his head. Pink magical threads fill the space. Iris stands with an angry expression on her face and her hands entangled. Durand turns around, his body bound by threads, and he screams that he cannot move. The elf with a grin looks at his hand, on which there are threads, and realizes that this is a binding spell, which is forbidden magic. The masked man takes a step forward and says that rage is comparable to a cup filled with poison. Because succumbing to meaningless emotions, he does not even think about his safety. The tattoo on the man's hand lights up, and he says that the elf is lucky. The masked man stands close to Elhail and says that his death is not yet in his plans. He holds the evil elf by the chin, and he says that this is nonsense. The iris disappears, turning into light smoke. She appears behind the masked man as the elf screams at him to get away from him. The masked man turns back, wondering if Elhail was able to free himself from this spell. Iris strikes the man, who says that the elf still cannot escape the shackles of fate. Elhail looks at the man's falling dark robe. Alarm appears on his face, and he wonders what kind of king and fate he was talking about. Durand sits next to his father and says that he will call someone to save him. He looks up at the elf and asks if this can be fixed with magic. Thomas turns his head to his son and tells him to always trust Elhail. He smiles, and blood pours from his mouth and eyes. He says that now the elf is the guy's only family. Elhail raises his head, tears flow from his eyes, and the man tells him about the Shilkrano. Durand winces and looks at his father's chest in shock, asking what it is. A glow emanates from the artifact on the chest. Thomas grits his teeth and screams as the artifact is removed from his body. A guy with tear-stained eyes screams at the elf to stop. The yellow magic ball glows. Elhail holds an artifact in a protective dome. Thomas smiles and closes his eyes, saying that now he can meet Leia. Rain drips from the sky, and the man tells them to take care of everything. The elf and the protagonist are sitting in the heavy rain. Thomas's head falls lifelessly to the side. Durand sobs, looking at his father in shock. He turns to him. The sun shines through the clouds. The evening light illuminates the tombstone, and the guy asks the elf what kind of man his father was. Elhail looks at the grave with a sad expression on his face. Under the tree are 2 tombstones, and the elf says that Thomas was strong and survived many turning points to save the war-stained Aelia, and someone like him cannot compare with him. Elhail flinches when Durand turns to him and tells him to show him this again. The sun shines on two people, and the guy says why his father had to die and what it is that he was ready to sacrifice his life for. The elf holds a shining artifact in his hand and says that it is a shulkrin, and he himself knows nothing except that it is an ancient relic. Durand furrows his brows and says that they died to get this. His hand gets scalded as soon as he wants to touch the artifact. He pulls his hand away with a scream and the elf tells him to be careful. Elhail looks down at the artifact and says that he placed a barrier on it, but even with his powers, it is difficult to maintain. Durand holds his hand and says with displeasure that such a dangerous thing was in his father's body. The artifact illuminates the elf's face, and he says that it is because Thomas could not create a barrier like him. The artifact glows against the background of the man's silhouette, and Elhail says that in order not to be caught by others, the only way he could use in the absence of magic was to hide it in his body. Durand rubs his hand and his gaze darkens. He furrows his brows and lowers his hands, asking what they will do now. The elf looks away and says that he will need to leave this place and go to the Heavenly Association. The sunset illuminates the heroes and the tombstones when Elhail says that he needs to find out what kind of relic it is and who these worms are who killed Thomas. Durand steps forward and says that then they need to leave now, to which the elf says that he cannot. The guy turns back in surprise and asks what he is talking about. The elf looks down and says that he has contacted a person he trusts, and therefore Durand will be safe with him for some time. The protagonist frowns and screams that he is really suggesting that he hide. His father has just died. He puts his hand to his chest and shouts for the elf to take him with him, because he has the right to do so, to which the elf replies that tomorrow this man will come and after that he will contact him again. Tears well up in Durand's eyes. He waves his hand and asks if in the end, it is because he is weak, because he will be a burden. He clenches his hand into a fist and says that he will also become stronger. He will become the same summoner and also. But he doesn't have time to finish. Durand flinches as the dark silhouette of the elf cries out that he doesn't want this. Elhail lowers his head and says that he doesn't want to lose everyone, including the protagonist. Durand opens his mouth in surprise. The elf leaves the boy, saying that he, too, will need to leave here for a while, so let him put his thoughts in order and return, but now he leaves. Durand looks after the elf as he leaves. He clenches his right hand into a fist and thinks, then why? Why doesn't he tell him everything? Does he really know nothing more? The masked figure approaches the elf and he says that his death is not yet in his plans. Durand's pupils shrink and he panics and wonders what those words meant. Light shines from a wooden building. The elf sits and uses magic on the artifact. The relic is surrounded by a dome of magic and Elhail says that it has finally calmed down. The elf throws his head back and thinks that not even a day has passed, and the barrier has weakened so much, and he is already tired of just maintaining this energy. He furrows his eyebrows and lowers his head, wondering how Thomas carried him inside for so long. He looks back at the source of the noise. Durand leans on his knees, out of breath, and the elf says that he is late. Elkabal rises from the table, telling the boy to hurry up with his preparations, and asks something, because the blonde knows who killed his father. The elf turns to the protagonist, asking what he means. Durand, with concern on his face, says that the man definitely said that his death was not in the plans of that man. Elhail shudders and worries, saying that this is a misunderstanding and he himself knows nothing about it, to which the boy says that this is a lie. Durand takes a step forward, screaming for him not to lie to him. The magical barrier over the artifact cracks and the boy screams for the elf to answer who they are. The protagonist looks at the elf in shock, who tells him to calm down. Elhail's mouth opens in surprise when the boy asks if he, too, wanted to take possession of the Shilkrano. The moon illuminates the elf's back, and he asks why Durand doesn't believe him. The barrier around the artifact cracks and Elhail says that Thomas was also a valuable member of the family for him, to which the boy shouts, asking what the words of that man meant then and how he knows the elf. Durand lets out his head and opens his mouth wide, shouting that this is all a lie and lies and now nothing makes sense. The barrier around the artifact cracks into pieces. The fragments fly in different directions. The elf turns back in surprise, wondering if the barrier has already collapsed. Durand raises his head and says that he will no longer trust anyone. The whites of his eyes light up pink, and he repeats that he doesn't want anyone. The elf looks back and worries, wondering why the barrier broke so unexpectedly. Was there really not enough magic? Why did this happen? He looks around at the protagonist, surrounded by magic. He reaches out his hand to Durand, surrounded by a magical field, wondering if the artifact really yearns for the boy. The protagonist passes by Elkale. The elf puts his hand on his shoulder and screams for the boy to be careful, because if he comes closer, there will be trouble. He closes his eyes against the bright light and screams. The elf shields his hand from the flow of magic and thinks that he has already used all the mana, and now he does not have enough strength. He calls Durand. The protagonist reaches his hand towards the relic while Elkale shouts to him. The elf shields his eyes from the bright light and screams for the boy not to let these forces consume him, so that he will come to his senses. A bright light shines from the protagonist's eyes and lightning sparkles. The space around is filled with dim reflections of light. Durand turns around and is surprised, asking what it is. He stands worried between several trees, looking around and asking where he is. The man holds a small chest in his hand. He furrows his eyebrows and thinks that he has no other options. The artifact attaches itself to his chest and glows. Durand looks at Thomas's silhouette, which has a hole and cracks in it. Confusion appears on his face, and he asks if this is his father. The guy turns his head when he hears someone's voice asking how he likes Durand Dresser. Leia holds the baby and moves her face closer to him and asks him if he likes the name. The protagonist looks at the dark silhouettes of two people. Tears appear in his eyes and he says, "Is this really his mother?" The man holds his hand on the wound on the girl's stomach and tells Leia to be patient a little, because the healer will come soon. The girl smiles and blood flows from her mouth. She says that Bernard protected the Shilkrano. Thomas lifts Leia's head with his hand and says that this is indeed so and the magic of summoning is imprinted in the Shilkrano. The girl brings her hand to the face of the crying man, who says that it was stupid, and he has no one more dear to her. Tears appear in her eyes, and she says that Bernard will be able to provide protection and apologizes for her leaving him, asking him to take care of Durand. The protagonist looks at the figures of his parents in shock and Thomas says that he does not want Leia to die. Fear appears on his face and he asks what it is, saying that he doesn't want to see all this. Blood flows from Thomas's eyes and mouth, and he smiles and tells Durand to always trust Elkale, because now he is his only family. The elf nods with tears on his cheeks when the man tells him about the Shilkrano. The artifact is taken out of Thomas's body, and he screams in pain. Durand holds his head in his hands and cries, screaming for it all to stop. He opens his eyes in surprise when he hears a voice addressing him, Thomas's son, Durand. The protagonist raises his head to the bright light, from which a voice is heard saying that these are memories of his father, the one he took as his victim. The guy frowns and sweat appears on his face, and he asks who he is. A figure appears in front of him, which glows with a bright light and says that it is the trace of the absolute creators of this world, as well as a being who prophesies the fate of Alia according to their will. Sadness appears on the protagonist's face, and he asks if he really caused the death of his father. An unusual creature glows with a bright light, and it says that Thomas's life has rightly ended, since he fled from the fate of destruction, the will of God, and the day is coming when the fate of Alia will be decided. Durand clenches his hands into fists and trembles, asking if his father's death was obvious. He lifts his head and gathers the magical power in his hand and yells at it to stop talking nonsense. Surprise appears on the guy's face. The protagonist's legs are wrapped in a burgundy substance, and he says that he cannot move his legs. The dark substance rises to the level of the guy's chest, and he wonders when it appeared. Durand stretches his hands towards the bright light, from which comes a voice that says whether the ring of endless deaths will continue or be interrupted. The guy's hand sticks out from the burgundy substance and the entity says that it depends only on the choice of the protagonist. Branches emerge from the burgundy pool. Durand rises from the bed with a piercing scream. He breathes heavily and the elf looks at him excitedly, asking if the boy has really come to his senses. An artifact lights up on the protagonist's chest. Elkale frowns and thinks that this was supposed to happen after all. Durand clutches the fabric of his pants and says that he will become stronger than now. Tears flow down his cheeks, and he says that he will do this so that the deaths of his parents are not in vain, and no matter what, he will prove it. The elf extends his hand to the boy, addressing him. Moonlight illuminates the ruins of the house in which the heroes are sitting, and so, after an unspoken agreement, they will meet with Elkale again. Somehow 4 years have passed. A ship with white sails arrives at the seaport. The sun illuminates the alleys of a small town, and someone is talking to each other about whether they have heard rumors about a thief who is constantly located near the black market in the north. The bald man with bread in his hand says that yes, he did hear something like that, asking what the rumors said about him completely robbing the entire market. Another bald man sits on a barrel with his arms crossed over his chest, while the fat man asks if this is all nonsense, saying that it seems like nothing was actually missing there. To which the thin man replies that this is suspicious, because he did so much noise and didn't even steal anything. The man takes a bite of bread and asks why he suddenly started talking about this thief. The thin man makes a dissatisfied expression on his face and says that the market was supposed to open the day before yesterday, to which the fat man asks, "And what after?" The man with the bun looks questioningly at his friend, who says that everything went well. The thin man gets up from his seat excitedly when his friend asks him what then, to which he asks what else it could mean. A tree leaf flies between the men while the thin one talks about how the black market only opens in the north and in their area, and if everything went smoothly there, he asks if that means that the man is here. The fat man closes his eyes and raises his head, telling his comrade not to worry, because Peyton is watching over this territory, despite what happened in the north. Here this man will lose his head for such a thing. A thin bald man with excitement on his face says that this man is not ordinary. The fat man asks if he is not ordinary. His comrade puts his index finger in front of him and says that this is really so and, judging by rumors, that man is an ox. A strong wind scatters the leaves of the trees, and the men get scared. They shield themselves from the gusts of wind, and the thin one asks where this wind comes from. The fat man looks at his flying bread in shock and screams as he only took one bite from it. The bread lands in the guy's hand, and he says this loaf is here. The men look back angrily, and one of them asks who it is. The guy is surrounded by wind with leaves, and he says that similar men had an interesting dialogue here. A smile appears on the mature Duran's face, and he asks if he can join. Anger appears on the fat man's face, and he shouts that the guy is a grain thief. Duran smiles widely and asks why men are angry. The beaten men raise their hands, and the protagonist tells them to continue talking about what they were talking about earlier. The thin man looks at the guy with disgust on his face and says that he was talking about being, that is, a thief, that is, a magician, to which the protagonist says that before that. The man gets scared and trembles, asking what they said, that if it was calm there, then perhaps he is with them. Duran smiles madly and his pupils get smaller. He says that in between. A fat man with a broken tooth excitedly says that Pathan is watching everything and what should they worry about. The protagonist comes close to the fat man and says that yes, this is what he meant and asks if he can tell him more about Pathan, telling him to tell him everything he knows about him. The blue light of the pipes illuminates a large room with robots. Several men are working with a conveyor belt, sorting through bags. The black man furrows his brows and shouts at them to hurry up, because if they don't hurry up, they won't get any provisions. An old man with glasses trips, dropping a box of parts. It falls to the floor and the gears and springs end up on the floor. One of the workers approaches the old man and asks if everything is okay with him, and a dark-skinned man, holding a whip in his hands, approaches. He hits the old man on the back, asking where this old man lost his concentration. Other workers turn their heads away from the beatings and the main one shouts, asking that besides this, he also drops things and the old man apologized. A small hand covers the old man and he tells the man to stop. A small anthropomorphic red panda covers an old man with his body. The dark-skinned man looks at them angrily and clicks his tongue. He takes his whip and leaves while the animal approaches the old man and the man tells them to consider themselves lucky today and the animal asks how Grandpa Ben is feeling, to which he says that he is becoming an extra burden for Badu. The panda, with excitement on his face, tells him not to say such sad things, asking if he didn't get hurt, to which the old man replies that he shouldn't worry and he just stumbled, after which someone shouts to Bat. A large man in a red bandana furrows his brows and holds his hands on his hips, telling the animal to return to its place and Mr. Peyton will not look at the fact that it is him if he continues to mess around. Badu bites his lip in anger. He moves away from the men, lowering his head. He says that he knows about it. He sits down on the chair in front of the robot and sighs. The lamp illuminates Badu's workspace, where robots and tools lie. Wall lamps illuminate the cave corridors. The old man turns to Bat, who is bandaging him, and says that he is too kind to him, to which the panda replies that he is talking about this again, and he asked not to talk about it like that. One of the workers puts his hand on his chest and says that in fact, all this is only thanks to the panda, and they are all indebted to him, and the other worker adds that he does not have to live like a slave just for them. Batu smiles widely and closes his eyes, asking where he can go without his family. From the open door there is light and a silhouette calls a panda. The man in the red bandana looks at Batu and tells him to come out as Captain Pathan called him. Excitement appears on the panda's face. A crowd of people stands in front of a landscape stage. An anthropomorphic dark-colored animal drinks wine from a glass. Batu with a dissatisfied expression stands behind Pathan, who says that he has finally arrived, and the panda asks why he called him at such a time. The dark animal puts the glass of drink on the table and says that he heard that today he interfered with the worker in order to protect Ben. Pathan's red eyes sparkle, and he says that even though he is his brother, he does not want to break the rules of this place. Batu clenches his teeth in anger and says that this is nonsense, and he only needs his abilities, calling him a traitor. Pathan raises his eyebrows and raises his head, asking if he is a traitor. With a sharp movement, he snatches his pistol. An electric projectile hits Bata, and he begins to scream. The panda lies on the floor. Small lightning comes from him, and Pathan asks how long Batu will delude himself that some people will be his family. The dark animal descends from the panda and tells him not to forget that they will always be ready to abandon him, so that he remembers what kind of life he lived and their family in Stiaden. Pathan walks away from Batu, who gritted his teeth and furrowed his brows, calling him a stupid little brother. The panda sits at his workplace and lowers his head. His hands clench into fists. Tears run down Batu's face, and he asks how this happened. Next to the old man Ben are his brothers, and the panda thinks that the older brother he knew was not like that. Batu raises his ear and shudders. He turns around at the sounds and, with a puzzled face, asks who is there. The lamp illuminates the face and part of a small corridor of robots. Batu takes the gun from his desk and tenses, wondering if it was a man or if something fell. He walks through the robots, taking aim, thinking that no one could get through to him because of the barrier. He moves the robot's hand away and picks up the gun. The dim light illuminates the empty space, and he wonders if there is really anyone. Duran tiptoes behind Batu. The claw asks if he really ran away, and something rings in the guy's head, which gives him away. The panda turns back at the sounds, thinking that he is behind. Batu shoots the net from his pistol, shouting that he has an uninvited guest. The protagonist extends his hand. Using magical power, he stops the net in front of him. The net falls between the heroes. Excitement appears on Batu's face, and he wonders if this man was protected by wind magic. The panda, with sweat on his face, asks if it's really him. Duran takes off his hood and sighs, saying that it scared him. He puts his hand on his side and asks why he's starting so abruptly, and Batu wonders if this is the same phantom thief from the rumors. Duran scratches his head and looks away, saying he thought it would be quieter this time. He lowers his head for the interested Batu. The panda, with confusion on his face, asks if the guy is the same thief who robbed the northern region, leaving nothing behind. Duran's face shows shock and confusion, and he shouts that he is a phantom kidnapper, not a thief. He did not steal anything, and therefore cannot be called a thief. He sits on a chair and holds a gas key in his hands, and Batu says that there is not much difference, asking why there are so many rumors about him, to which the protagonist replies that he is looking for something, and thought it would be in Quastasia. Duran throws the gas key behind his back, and says that there is nothing here either, nothing at all except all sorts of pieces of iron, as if there was some kind of factory here. Batu looks at the guy excitedly and thinks that it could be him. He points his hand at the robot and with a smile tells the guy to tell him what he needs, because he can do it, and he doesn't have to worry about the quality, because all this equipment was created by his hands. Duran sighs and stands up, looking at the panda, saying that he is of course grateful, but Batu will never be able to create this thing, to which the panda asks what it is and why he is so sure of it. The light of the lamp illuminates the protagonist's face, and he says that this is an ancient magic tablet that will help the summoner's heir. Batu awkwardly turns his head away and lowers his ears, saying that such a thing cannot be created, to which the guy replies that he was talking about just that. The panda clenches his hands into fists and looks at the protagonist with suspicion, wondering what's going on, and Durand asks where he should go if it's empty. The guy turns his head with his eyes closed and says that since he's finished here, then it's time for him to leave, and Batu screams that of course this cannot be created. Panda frowns and says that there is someone who might know about this tablet. Durand's face darkens and he asks with a serious expression who he means. The light of the lamps illuminates the corridors of the caves and someone says that they cannot stay here for the rest of their lives. One of the workers extends his hand and says that even if they have to fight, they must get out of here, and the other man adds, turning to the elder, that they must at least free Bata from here. Old man Ben hangs his head down while one of the workers asks if he knows what kind of work Batu is facing because of them. The panda runs to his grandfather and turns to him smiling. Durand turns his gaze to the old man, wondering if his name is Ben. Grandfather holds Bata by the back and looks questioningly at the guy, asking the panda who is with him, saying that there should definitely be security here. A man falls from the passage into the room and the protagonist asks if he really means these sleepers. The old man, with a surprised expression on his face, asks how he did this, to which Durand asks if it's unexpected, isn't it? But it also happens, and says that he is just as glad to meet you. The protagonist sits on a chair nearby and says that since the greetings are over, he will get straight to the point. He raises his head and places his hands on his knees, saying that he knows about the ancient magic tablet, asking if it is true. Batu approaches the old man and puts his hand down, whispering that this man is the same phantom thief known from the case from the northern part of Quastasia. Perhaps if they conspire with him, he can help them get out of here. Durand listens with enthusiasm on his face to Ben, who says that perhaps he can guess where the ancient magic tablet is, to which the guy asks the truth and where it is, and the grandfather says that he has a condition. The old man's face darkens and he points to Batu, who looks up in surprise, and he says that the guy should take this baby with him. The panda turns around with a surprised look on his face and shouts that no, he can't leave them all here and go alone, and Ben replies that he can't stand to watch him work to protect them any longer. The old man frowns and asks if he can't be in debt to Batu all his life. A sad look appears on the panda's face and his ears droop. He says that Pathan obviously won't leave them alone if he runs away. The old man turns away from Batu, saying that this is a common opinion, and he screams, asking if it is really common, because they didn't even ask him about it, to which Ben replies that no matter what the kid thinks, this is the final decision. Durand furrows his brows with irritation and asks how long they will talk. He flinches and widens his eyes when Batu shouts that they are family. Panda raises his hand, clenched into a fist, and says that he cannot leave them so selfishly. Durand remembers how he lost his father. He scratches the back of his head and closes his eyes, saying that nothing can be done about it then. Ben and Batu look at the guy with surprised expressions, who says that if he doesn't want to go alone, he'll have to take everyone. An upset look appears on the old man's face, and he asks if the guy has a plan, because they will definitely get caught if they are all together. Durand smiles, showing his teeth, and says that this is true. He raises his index finger and smiles, saying that's why they attack directly. The workers look at the guy with blank looks. Durand waves his hand and says that they will go ahead, just like that. The crowd looks at him with smiles and enthusiasm. Batu waves his hand and the protagonist looks at him, and the panda says that this is impossible, since they do not have weapons, and the guy asks why this is, because the baby was creating something. His eyes light up, and he happily says that he has leukemia. The workers stand with smiles, clenching their hands into fists. They say that they will teach him a lesson and will not leave just like that. They raise their fists in the air and say great, asking that then everything is decided. Durand turns his head. Streak is surprised when the guy turns to him. The protagonist brings his hand to his face, thinking. He turns away from Ben, saying that it's nothing, and the old man asks what he wants. Durand's face darkens and he turns to his grandfather, saying that no, he just wanted to say that he should not stand aside, making excuses of old age, and they do not have enough hands, and that he should fight with them. Ben's face darkens and his glasses catch the light from the lamps, and he agrees. The robots on the wall in the room are illuminated by a blue light, and someone shouts that there is a problem. A blond man with a uniform holds his hand and belt, while the other is short of breath and asks what happened, to which the brunette says that the slaves started a riot. A large explosion occurs behind the dark-haired man. He turns around with an excited expression on his face. Behind the dark silhouette of the magician is a crowd of people. Durand turns to the men and tells them to take all the weapons they see, and the workers agree. The guy turns his green eyes towards the screams that they are ungrateful creatures. People run to the center and one of them shouts, asking how they dare to betray those who gave them food and shelter. The blond man in the uniform furrows his brows as the others take aim with their weapons, and he screams that none of them will get out of here. A predatory smile appears on Durand's face, and he says that this is wonderful. A robot descends from above, in which Batu sits. The blond man looks up and is surprised. A large robot rises above him. The protagonist's eyes light up, and he says that he didn't plan to let them go anyway. Batu uses leverage in his work. Mechanical arms swing in impact. He spins around, hitting several guards. A blond man with a furious expression on his face shouts, asking why they are standing. The riot needs to be stopped. The guards stand in a line in front of the robot and aim their weapons, while the main one shouts that Mr. Payton will finish them off if they manage to escape, ordering them to stand in a line. Batu turns to his friends and screams that the guys are in danger. The blond man waves his hand forward, yelling for them to open fire. The bullets fly, hitting the robot, and the man screams for them to kill all the slaves. Durand smiles and gathers magic in his hand. He lowers his hand with air magic. He raises his hand, forming a barrier from bullets, and says that, in fact, he is not so simple that he would be hit by some bullets. The blond man looks at the magical barrier in surprise and asks if he really repelled the bullets with magic. Really? Durand furrows his brows and smiles widely when the man screams that this is the same magical thief who destroyed the North, to which the guy says that he guessed right. The blond man turns to the brunette, who runs away and says that this is a magician and they need to retreat. Durand uses magic to catch the bullets. The man turns to the other guards and says that they are idiots for running now. The protagonist finds himself next to the man and asks, "So what?" The blond man clenches his teeth and thinks that the guy is very fast. Durand hits the man in the head, knocking him up into the air. He lands, kicking up dust, and the guy asks if he didn't talk. He rubs his arm and smiles widely, saying that he won't let either of them go on good terms. The old man stands behind the guy, who asks where the others are running and that they should come to him. A blond man lies with knocked out teeth and a broken nose. He is trying to rise above the ground with his hands. The light of the lamps shines on the old man from behind, and he stands over the man. There are locked iron gates, near which there are luminous pipes, and the guy says that they have dealt with the security, stocked up on weapons. Now all that remains is to open these gates to go outside through the auction hall. Durand raises his hand to the thoughtful face and asks that the gate looks strong. How can they break it? To which Batu in the robot says that he will try. Panda hits the door with his robot elbow. Smoke is coming from the dent in the gate. Durand and Batu look at the door with surprised glances, and the guy says that Lukumetan did nothing to the doors. Apparently they are stronger than they thought. The protagonist turns to a voice that asks why the guy is so worried. Durand raises one eyebrow and sweat appears on his face, wondering if this old man has always been like this. Then approaches the guys, cutting through the rising dust. The guy with an excited expression on his face taps his finger on the robot and turns to the kid, calling him Masterpiece of Iron, to which he goes down to him and asks what he needs. Sweat runs down Durand's face and he asks if the old man's aura has changed. Ben walks between the guys. The old man's face darkens and only his glasses shine, and the guy says that something has definitely changed in the old man, as if he is hiding some kind of power. Batu looks questioningly at the protagonist and asks if he really means Grandpa Ben, saying that this cannot be, to which Durand tells him to look more carefully, because his instincts are never wrong. Ben presses something on the panel and it clicks. He turns to the guys and says that the door is now open. Batu on the robot opens the door from which a bright light shines. He waves his hand and looks at the guy with a smile, asking if he was hiding the power to unlock the doors. A bright lamp illuminates a large room and Batu says that this is the black market representing the southern region of Quastasia, Croatia. Durand turns to the kid and asks how they will get out of here. Several purple-veined bars snap shut and someone screams out what's happening. Steam comes from the mechanism and someone shouts that they are locked up. People in the hall turn around when they hear someone's voice who says that it was not enough that Batu stood on the same side with the people, so they also started a riot, and he greatly disappointed him. One of the windows breaks and two mechanical tentacles come out. A large dark figure lands in front of the people. Pathan stands in front of them in a large dark robot and asks if Batu really trusts people, even despite what they did to them. Durand looks up at the baby and asks if he really knows him, asking who it is. He turns in surprise at Batu, who says that this is his older brother, and the guy exclaims, "What?" The panda turns to the crowd of people and says that those guys who were locked up here are the villagers who accepted them wandering around Stiaden. Several workers stand ready to fight. The protagonist clenches his teeth and frowns. He says that this is terrible because people did a good deed for him, and he considers them enemies. Pathan raises his eyebrows and looks at the people, saying that since he found out who he is, he even less wants to leave him alive. Durand gets angry and waves his arms when the old man covers him with his hand, and the guy shouts that now he will beat him, to which Ben says that he shouldn't. The protagonist carefully watches his grandfather, who tells him to get some rest. He slams his hand on the robot as Batu screams at the old man that it's dangerous, and the guy says it's okay. He lowers his head and tells the baby to just believe him, to which the panda screams that there is nothing to believe. But what if he dies? The old man walks forward, folds his hands behind him, and Durand says that this will not happen. He lowers his head as he stands in front of Pathan. Ben raises his head, saying that they haven't seen him for a long time. Pathan lowers his head, looking at the old man. He asks what the powerless old man can do to him. He waves the robot's hand and says that he will kill him first, for example, and says fire. The old man, with a sharp movement of his hand, takes out his pistol. The guards fall to the floor, screaming. Pathan turns to the crowd of defeated men and asks that they are complete idiots for allowing the old man to kill them. Batu looks at his grandfather in surprise, and the guy smiles widely, saying that now he understands. Panda descends closer to the protagonist and asks if he really knew, to which Durand replies that he suspected when he found out his name, but now he's definitely convinced. Excitement appears on the guy's face, and he says that the one who raised him told him about this man so many times that he memorized this story from his friend, who is usually calm, but goes crazy as soon as he touches the gun. A man in a cloak stands illuminated by the sun, and Durand says that this is the Sky Pirate of legend, a colleague of Captain Eve. A wide smile appears on the old man's face, and the protagonist calls him Shooter Ben of Daya. The elf with white hair is illuminated by the sun, and the man says that she was a legendary pirate with a bad reputation, Captain Eve. She is surrounded by several people, and he continues that the sky piracy that she controls corresponds to the legends about pirates. Each member of their crew had their own amazing skills, and among them there was one person with a fighting character, with whom even Eve herself was hard to compare. Several pistols cross each other, and the man says that his longtime friend Ben Evdaya and the shooter lived up to his nickname with his outstanding shooting skills, and one day he asked him what he shoots better with, a revolver or a rifle. A man with a big hat with a big smile says that he shoots well with anything that has bullets, and the man says that's what he told him. Durand sits on the floor, looking bored, and is asked if this is amazing. Horner puts his index finger in front of him and says that he also has a terrible character trait. He becomes a different person as soon as the weapon falls into his hands. The man stands with a smile, and smoke comes out of his pistols, and his uncle says that the one who seems calm in ordinary life immediately goes berserk as soon as he picks up a pistol, like a mad dog. Durand crosses his arms and lets out a long yawn. He looks sleepily at Horner, who asks him if he's not interested. He raises one eyebrow and leans on his hand, asking if he should be interested, saying that he talks about Ben every free minute and doesn't even teach him what he asked him to do. The guy points his finger at Horner when he asks him what the guy is interested in, to which he asks who is stronger than them. The man smiles from ear to ear and asks what these questions are. He points his thumb at himself and smiles, saying that of course it's him. A crazy smile appears on the old man's face, and he fires his pistol at incredible speed. Excitement and fear appear on Durand's face. He wonders if Horner is stronger than him. He watches Ben wield a pistol and thinks that his uncle was actually mistaken and asks if something like this is even possible with one pistol. The old man smiles madly and waves his arms, shouting and asking if this is all. How can they be so weak at their young age? Two guards fall on Ben and shout that the enemy has a gun, and they need to wait until he reloads. The old man shoots them and says that this won't happen because he uses magic. Ben's face shows madness and he laughs, telling them to all die. Durand and Batu look at the old man with surprise and admiration, and the panda says that this is so amazing. The protagonist looks in surprise at the workers and the baby, who smile and raise their hands up, supporting the head and telling him to kill them all. Several bullets land right at their feet, and they exclaim, "Elder?" Steam comes out of the old man's mouth, and he covers his face, telling them not to make noise. Smoke comes out of the barrel of his gun, and he says that because of them he cannot hear the sound of gunfire. Excitement appears on the guys' faces, and the protagonist thinks that he doesn't know what this could mean, but it's clearly better not to interfere with him now. Ben puts his hand on the lower back and says that apparently he has dealt with these guards. Peyton looks at the old man questioningly, saying that in fact he was not an ordinary grandfather. Ben holds the gun behind his back when the dark animal asks him why he didn't think of running away with such and such abilities, to which the old man replies that he usually only accepts this method of re-education when there is no other choice left. Ben raises his eyebrows and says that, besides, you can't make excuses for re-education by making holes in other people and, in fact, he doesn't prefer violence and is still in thought. Peyton clenches his teeth and says that he is like some kind of person. The old man dodges his blow and he shouts that how dare he pretend to be his father. Ben bends down, dodging another attack, and Peyton shouts at him not to talk nonsense. With his robot, he attacks several times and shouts not to forget how they suffered at the hands of humans. Durand watches the flying debris as someone yells for them to quickly hide. He waves his hand. The boomerang destroys large debris. The guy catches the boomerang and the workers breathe a sigh of relief thanks to him. The old man clenches his teeth and takes aim, saying, "Why does he do it all the time?" Ben fires a huge beam of energy from his gun and shouts that he will contradict his father. He grabs his lower back and says his lower back hurts. Peyton dodges the magic beam. He waves his robotic arms and screams, asking who his father is anyway. The old man looks up. Batu on the robot protects him. The panda turns to Ben, asking if he is okay, to which the old man replies that age cannot be fooled. Batu furrows his eyebrows and shouts, asking what Peyton is doing. A dark animal with an angry expression on his face asks that he should be asked how long he is going to hang around with these people. Are they really more important to him than his blood brother? Batu stops Peyton with his robot and says that he, Grandpa Ben, and the people from the village are all family to him. His brother's robot claws grab his arms. Electricity rushes through Bat and his robot, and the baby screams in pain. He falls down exhausted. Tears appear in Batu's eyes, and he asks his older brother to come to his senses, because he was not like that, asking where the brother he knows went to. Peyton hits the kid with his claw and screams how much longer he is going to stir up the past. Batu falls to the floor and steam emanates from him. The workers excitedly turn to him. Durand watches as the people run to attack, screaming. They hit the Peyton robot with their weapons. Batu rises in his arms and one of the people tells him to run away, and they will stop him, even if they have to sacrifice their lives. The kid is surprised when a person gets hit. The protagonist raises his hand to his face and thinks maybe he shouldn't have attacked directly. A hand rests on his shoulder while he thinks that since this happened, he will simply get the information he needs from Old Man Ben. Goosebumps run through his body when he is addressed as Durand Dresser. The guy waves his hand over the old man holding his lower back and asks how he knows his name and why he is even in such a position, to which the old man replies that the guy is very similar to Laius. The protagonist looks at Ben with concern on his face and asks if he really knows his mother. The old man raises one eyebrow and asks if he scoured the entire black market in search of a magic tablet because of Bernard, the summoner of Laius. Peyton attacks the workers' men while Ben says that if he wants to get information, now is his chance, and he needs to save the villagers. The old man looks up at Durand and asks him what he will do, saying that in advance in case of refusal, if he leaves, he will not receive anything. The guy frowns and indignation appears on his face. Peyton's face becomes furious and he says that they are like some kind of beetles. He hits the man with his robotic arm, shouting for them to stop getting in the way. Durand grits his teeth and says that as if he's leaving them a choice. He covers the person with a magical shield. His eyes light up with a bright light, and he turns to the old man. A magical field appears around him, and he tells the old man to keep his promise. A magical vortex forms around Durand. Pathan furrows his eyebrows and says that this guy is causing chaos everywhere with his magic, asking how he even got here. A wide smile appears on the protagonist's face, and he lowers his eyebrow, asking what he wants to take note of. Pathan's face becomes furious, and the tattoo lights up on his stomach. His robot jumps under the protagonist, and he screams, asking what he thought of mocking him. Durand's pupils shrink and his mouth opens in surprise. He exclaims, "This pattern." Tension appears on his face, and he dodges the attack. Frowning his eyebrows, he looks at the wall and notices a hole. Durand accumulates magic in his hands. He releases magical power into one of the robot's claws. Pathan is thrown back, and he screams. The guy turns to the people and shouts at them to run away quickly right now. Batu on the robot points to the hole and tells everyone to go there. Pathan extends his hand and cries out, asking where they are going. The boomerang hits the robot's hand. Durand catches him by raising his hand up and says, "Hey, tattooed raccoon, let's talk." An angry look appears on his face, and he says that he is interested in something. People are climbing the steps. Batu looks back sadly, then turns to look at the baby as one of the people holds him. The panda flinches and stops when the old man asks if things will change if he goes there. Batu sadly lowers his head, saying that no, but to leave like this. Then, being on the worker's back, asks why he's standing, let him go, to which the kid is surprised. A wide smile appears on the old man's face, and he says that if this is his opinion, then he will only waste time trying to convince them. Batu agrees with joy on his face. He leaves and turns back, thanking Ben. The worker with an excited look asks if everything will be all right, to which the old man replies that well, it will be good if the baby doesn't die. The worker turns his head in surprise and asks how he can say that, then why did he send him there? The old man laughs loudly and asks if he really doesn't understand. Batu has a wide smile on his face, and Ben says that running away is definitely not about him. Durand dodges the robot's attacks. The tattoo on the masked man's arm glows red, and the guy wonders that his father's killer had the exact same tattoo. The guy grits his teeth and runs forward. Pathan slams his claw into the ground and screams, asking how long he is going to run away from him like a rat. Durand jumps and dodges, asking when the raccoon will stop dodging the question. He swings using magic and shouts at him to answer and asks where he got this tattoo from. A blue magical vortex wraps around the robot. The middle of the robot glows scarlet. The guy grabs his head and gets angry, exclaiming how terrible it is, and asking how one Leucomaiden can be so strong. Excitement appears on his face, and he lowers his hands, thinking that he really can't do this. The robot runs towards the protagonist, and he wonders what the power of that pattern can do, because if not, then he sees no other explanation for the situation. Durand dodges the claws and thinks that Pathan doesn't want to talk, and if he catches him, he might find out something. He gets into a fighting stance and thinks that this is all he can do now. The guy turns his head back in surprise. Pathan gets a big, evil smile on his face and says he caught him. Durand watches as he is attacked and wonders what he can do. Batu jumps out of the robot. He lands directly on his brother and tells the protagonist to act now. Excitement and bewilderment appear on the guy's face, and he asks what's going on. He gave them time to escape. Why did the baby come back? Batu holds Pathan's face and shouts, asking if this is important now, because he has a chance. The guy runs his finger across his throat and asks what chance there is of killing him, to which the panda replies no. The robot's claw grabs the kid as he says this is a chance to strike. Batu falls to the floor, bouncing off him. Pathan's eyes light up with a scarlet light, and he says that he will kill them all. He swings his robot's fist and says that they will pay for what they turned this place into. Durand gathers magic in his palm, saying that actually it wasn't them, but he created this devastation himself. The guy creates a magical shield and blocks the blow. A crack appears in the magic shield. A large explosion occurs, scattering debris. Durand lands, covering Bata with himself, and ponders that he cannot use more complex techniques. Red energy forms around the Pathan robot, and he says that judging by the guy's face, he no longer has a way out. A smirk appears on his face, and he attacks, saying that he is finished now. A magical protection is formed over the protagonist's head. Durand looks at his chest and wonders if this is a Shilkrano. Pathan's face shows shock. Several streams of pink energy pierce the robot. Everything around is covered in flames. Pathan falls to the floor and bounces away. The guy is shocked and sweat rolls down his face. The dark raccoon is trembling, lying on the floor, and Durand says that he does not know what happened or how. But now they can talk. The guy furrows his eyebrows, asking what the pattern is. Pathan rises in his arms and asks what he means. The protagonist scratches his head and says that every time the raccoon changes the topic. His face darkens and he screams, asking where he got that tattoo on his chest. Pathan's eyes light up with a bright red light. Durand and Batu Autumn get very scared and scream.